All right, so suppose you and your friends form a band, and your band wants to make a CD. You find a company that charges $250 to record the CD, and they're also going to charge you $3 per CD to actually make the CD itself. So the total cost T of C, this is our function notation, this is just like saying f of x, they just changed it to T of C, depends on the number of CDs, C, burned. So write a function rule to show the total cost of the CDs. So the total cost, T of C, is equal to the original $250 to record the CD plus $3 for each CD. Remember, we talked about each being that special keyword. So 3 times X, or sorry, 3 times C in this situation. And then we create a table and a graph to match this. So we have C and T of C. So this is the number of CDs. And then this is going to be your total cost. So for a number of CDs, let's go ahead and look at 50, 100, 150, 200, and 250. So just like we practiced before, you are going to plug each of these in to this function and find out what the output is. So we have T of C equals 250 plus 3 times 50. 3 times 50 is 150, plus 250 is 400. Do the same thing, plug in 100. 3 times 100 is 300, plus 250 is going to be 550. When you plug all of these in, we're going to get 700, 850, and 1000. Now we need to label our graph. So we know that the x coordinates are going to be the number of CDs, and the y coordinates will be the total cost. So for a number of CDs, I'm going to go ahead and go by 50 since that's what we did here. And go by, let's say we go by 200s on the side. So then we go ahead and plot these points. And we can connect them like so. So what does the total cost depend on? It's going to depend on how many CDs you make. We call that the independent variable. The number of CDs would be the independent variable. What changed as the number of CDs increased? The cost changed, which is the dependent variable because it depends on the number of CDs that are made. So your x is always going to be the independent variable, and the y will also always be the dependent variable. So go ahead and pause now and do the understanding check. Okay, so to check our understanding check, it's saying that you need to deliver your CDs to several cities. You find a company that charges you $30 to rent the truck and $2 per mile. What does the total cost depend on? It's going to depend on how many miles you drive. So we need to write this function rule. The total cost is equal to 2 times the number of miles plus the original $30 just to rent the truck. And then we go ahead and make a function table. If you chose different numbers, it's okay. These are just some easy numbers to pick, so 10 miles from home, 20 miles from home, so on. Plug these numbers in to your function rule. So 2 times 10 plus 30, that's going to give you 50. 2 times 20 is 40, plus 30 is 70. And then we graph this line. So what is the independent variable? Like we said before, the x-axis is always the independent variable. So in this case, it is miles. And what is the dependent variable? The cost. The cost depends on the number of miles. All right, so now they're just giving us these tables, and we need to figure out the function rule from the table. So you're trying to find a pattern here. The easiest way to look at this first is to see how much is this going by each time. So here we're adding 2 each time. That's going to show up somewhere in that problem as long as these are going by 1. If these are not going by 1, then we would divide this, the change in y, divided by the change in x, just like we were doing for the slope. So if we're adding 2 each time, you can also look at the relationship between the x and the y. What's the relationship here? Each time they are multiplying 2 to get from the x to the y. So I know that 2 times x equals the f of x, or the y. Here, there's nothing that I can see that's being multiplied. It's going up by 1 each time, so that doesn't really help me. So if it's not being multiplied by something, let's see if it's being added or subtracted. So -2 plus 5 equals 3. -1 plus 5 equals 4. 0 plus 5 equals 5. So all of these are plus 5. So the x plus 5 is going to give me my y. Now this one's a little more tricky. There is a constant going down, so we are adding 3 each time. So that is your constant rate of change is 3. But that doesn't work because if I do -2 times 3, I don't get -7. 1 times 3, I don't get 2. So let's see what happens. If I multiply times 3, I get 6. But then if I subtract 1, I get 5. So 1 times 3, I get 3, minus 1, I get 2. So the pattern here is 3 times the x minus 1 gives me the y. Go ahead and pause now and do the understanding check. So for this first table in the understanding check, this one was another simple pattern. If you notice, you are just multiplying 5 times the x to be able to get the y. So 5 times x equals y. For B, there's nothing I can multiply. If I did 2 times 3, that gives me -6, but 1 times 3 is not -5, so that doesn't work. So I'm going to try subtraction. If I subtract 4, I get -6. Subtract 4, I get -5. 0 minus 4 is -4. 1 minus 4 is -3, so obviously this pattern works. So each of the x's, I subtract 4 to get the f of x. And for the last one, I can see that there's a pattern here. The rate of change would be 2, but 2 times -2 would be -4. So that's not going to give me 1. So let's try with some of these easy numbers. If I did 1 times 2, I get 2, plus 5 gives me 7. 2 times 2 gives me 4, plus 5 gives me 9. So it is 2x plus 5 equals y. All right, now we need to write a function rule using a situation. The total distance traveled after h hours at a constant speed of 20 miles per hour. So here we are going to multiply the number of hours times the speed to find out how far we traveled. So distance equals 20 times h. The height of an object in feet when you know the height in inches. So if we know the height in inches and we know that there are 12 inches in 1 foot, I can divide the number of inches I have by 12 to find out how many feet that is. C, the profit you make from mowing lawns at $10 a lawn minus the cost of purchasing the mower for $100. So the profit is going to be equal to however much you make, so 10 times the number of lawns, minus that original $100 you had to spend on the mower. And then go ahead and pause for your understanding check. So the pay a worker earns whose hourly wage is $9.50 per hour. So the pay is equal to $9.50 times the number of hours worked. And the price of purchasing a pizza for $10 plus $2 for each topping. So the pizza will cost $10 just for getting a pizza plus $2 for each topping. And then now it is time for you to go ahead and do your homework.